Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. Sylvanas Windrunner stood at the top of the crumbling battlements of Lord Arun, her red eyes scanning the ruined city below. The air was thick with the scent of decay, a constant reminder of what she had become. She had once been a ranger general, a protector of her people, but those days were long gone. Now she ruled over the Forsaken, the undead who had broken free of the Lich King's control, and she was their queen. But even in her triumph, there were chains she could not break. Fairies, her demon ally, if such a word could apply, had been useful in the past. His knowledge, his cunning, had helped her seize control of Lord Arun. Yet in the shadows of their alliance, Sylvanas had always known that his loyalty was fickle, his true allegiance to powers darker and deeper than any mortal could comprehend. She had tolerated him for too long, bound by a pact she could not escape. But that would soon change. The blade of vengeance, an ancient weapon, whispered about, in forgotten tomes, promised to sever those chains. The blade was said to possess the power to break any bond, to destroy any master, and Sylvanas knew it was her only hope of ridding herself of fairies' influence forever. With it, she could consolidate her power over the Forsaken without the specter of demon manipulation looming over her. Sylvanas' gloved fingers tightened around the edge of her bow as she looked toward the horizon. Her thoughts raced with plans and calculations. She would leave tonight under the cover of darkness with only her most trusted ally. No one, not even fairies, could know of her quest. If the demon suspected her intentions, he would stop at nothing to destroy her. She turned sharply and descended from the battlements into the heart of the Forsaken city. The hallways were cold and silent, lined with stone walls that echoed the soft tread of her footstep. At the end of a long corridor, a dim light flickered from the war room where Nathana's blight collar awaited her. Are the preparations made? Nathanos, her loyal ranger general and most trusted servant, bowed his head. Everything is ready, my queen. The team is assembled and awaiting your command. We will leave as soon as you give the order. Sylvanas nodded, her face a mask of cold determination. Good. We must be swift and silent. If Varimathers catches wind of this mission, it could mean our end. Do you truly believe this blade exists? Stenos asked, his voice low but steady. We've searched for years, followed countless rumors. What makes you certain this time? Sylvanas' eyes flickered with a hint of something darker, something almost desperate. I've uncovered new information, an old text from one of the Lich King's library. It speaks of a fortress hidden in the haunted forests of the Eastern Kingdoms where the blade was last seen. Nathanos didn't question further. He knew better than to doubt her. So then we are ready, my queen. As Sylvanas and her small group slipped out of Lord Arun under the cover of night, a sense of unease gnawed at her. She trusted Nathanos implicitly, but the others, they were Forsaken. Yes, but loyalty was a rare commodity among the undead. Everyone had their own agenda, and if word of this mission reached Varimathers, everything could fall apart. The journey was long and treacherous. Sylvanas led her group through forgotten pathways deep into the dark forests where no light could penetrate. The trees were twisted and gnarled, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching toward the sky. The ground beneath them was damp and cold, the very air thick with an unnatural chill. As they ventured deeper, the tension grew palpable. Sylvanas could feel eyes watching from the shadows, unseen but ever present. This place was old, older than even the kingdoms of men, and it held secrets darker than any Sylvanas had encountered before. Stay alert, Sylvanas whispered to her companions as they reached the edge of a massive ravine. Across the way stood a crumbling fortress, its stone walls blackened by centuries of decay. This was the place. She could feel it. In her bones, the blade of vengeance lay within. Without a word, the group began their descent into the ravine, moving quickly but cautiously. Sylvanas' senses were heightened, her every instinct telling her that danger was near. And yet they reached the entrance of the fortress unscathed. The gates were heavy and rusted, groaning as Sylvanas pushed them open. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the smell of rot. The walls were lined with ancient tapestries, their images long faded, but Sylvanas paid them no mind. Her focus was on the prize. They moved deeper into the fortress, the hallways narrowing as they descended into the lower level. It was theirs, in the heart of the fortress, that Sylvanas finally saw it, the blade of vengeance. It was embedded in a stone altar, the hilt shimmering with a faint otherworldly glow. Her heart quickened as she stepped forward, her hand outstretched. But before she could reach it, a familiar voice echoed through the chamber. "Sylvanas, my dear." Varimathra's voice dripped with condescension. "Vera, did you really think you could hide this from me?" Sylvanas whirled around, her bow drawn in an instant. Standing in the shadows of the chamber was Varimathras, his demonic form towering over her. Behind him, a group of demonic minions crept forward, their eyes glowing with malice. "You've played your hand too early," Sylvanas Varimathras sneered, stepping closer. "The blade of vengeance is powerful, yes, but it will not give you the freedom you seek. It will consume you body and soul." Sylvanas' eyes narrowed, her grip tightening on her bowstring. "I will not be your puppet any longer, Varimathras. I will take the blade and break the chains that bind me to you. You always were ambitious, but ambition without foresight is a dangerous thing. The blade will not free you, it will destroy you." The tension in that air crackled like static. Sylvanas could feel the weight of Varimathras' words pressing down on her, but she refused to yield. She had come too far, sacrificed too much. This was her only chance. Without warning, Varimathras lunged forward, his claws outstretched. Sylvanas fired an arrow, but he was too quick, swatting it aside with ease. Her forsaken companions leapt into action, engaging Varimathras' demonic forces in a brutal fight. Sylvanas darted toward the altar, her eyes locked on the blade. She could feel its power, pulsing, beckoning her, promising her everything she had ever wanted. With a final surge of determination, she reached out and grasped the hilt. The moment her fingers wrapped around the blade, a surge of dark energy shot through her, sending a shockwave across the room. Varimathras staggered, momentarily thrown off balance, and Sylvanas seized the opportunity. She swung the blade with all her might, the air itself seeming to scream as the weapon cut through it. Varimathras barely had time to react as the blade cleaved through his chest, the demonic energy within him exploding outward in a burst of red light. His body crumpled to the ground, lifeless. But Sylvanas was not triumphant. The moment the blade had struck Varimathras, she had felt it, the hunger. The blade of vengeance was not merely a weapon. It was a parasite feeding off the souls of those it killed, and now it was feeding off her. Her vision blurred, her grip on the blade tightening involuntarily. The whispers of power, of vengeance, grew louder in her mind. It wanted more. It craved more death, more destruction, and it would not stop until it consumed everything. As her forsaken companions mopped up the last of Varimathras' forces, Sylvanas stood frozen, her body trembling. The blade was whispering to her, urging her to take more, to kill more, to feed it. Nathanos approached cautiously, his eyes wide with concern. "How, my queen, are you?" Before he could finish, Sylvanas turned on him, her eyes blazing with dark power. "Barry, stay back." Tara, she hissed, the blade pulsing in her hand. Nathanos hesitated, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. He had never seen Sylvanas like this. She was always in control, always cold and calculating. But now she seemed almost unhinged. "The blade itself's not what we thought," Sylvanas whispered, her voice trembling. "Crowl it, sell it, set it, sounding me." Nathanos' eyes flickered with understanding. "You need to let it go. Destroy it before it's too late." Sylvanas wanted to. She could feel the blade sour, pulling her deeper, dragging her soul into a pit of darkness, but she couldn't let go. She couldn't. Something deep inside her refused to release its grip, the power. It was intoxicating. It surged through her veins, filling every fiber of her being with the strength of a god. The whispers of the blade urged her to use it, to destroy everything and rebuild it anew in her image. She was the Banshee Queen, the master of death itself. Why should she deny the weapon that could make her the ultimate ruler? But another voice echoed in her mind, faint but insistent. It was the voice of who she used to be, the Ranger General, the protector, the Sylvanas who had fought to save her people, not enslave them. That part of her, long buried under years of hatred and vengeance, was struggling to break free. Nathanos stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "Sorry, Sylvanas, you must destroy it. This isn't the way ta." She snarled, the dark energy swirling around her. "No, you don't, you understand. With this blade, I can end it all. No one will ever control me again. Not Varimathras, not anyone. But at what cost?" Nathanos pressed her, losing yourself. "Look at what it's doing to you." For a brief moment, Sylvanas faltered. She could feel the weight of the blade in her hand, heavy with the souls it had consumed. It was not just a weapon, it was a living thing, and it wanted her soul too, but the promise of power was so seductive. Before she could decide, the doors to the chamber burst open. A group of figures clad in ragged armor and carrying battered weapons entered, their leader a tall, stern-faced man with piercing blue eyes. The Lord Arryn resistance had arrived. Sylvanas, Windrunner, the leader called out, his voice carrying across the room. Your reign ends here. The resistance had been following her, watching her every move. They'd planned to strike when she was most vulnerable, and now with the blade corrupting her mind, they saw their chance. The soldiers fanned out readying their weapons, but they hesitated when they saw her, bathed in the dark aura of the blade of vengeance. The leader, a young commander named Enren, stepped forward. You think that weapon will save you, but it will only destroy you. You've lost too much already, Danti. Let this be the end. Sylvanas' gaze flicked toward him, her eyes glowing with the blade's malevolent power. You dare to lecture me? You know nothing of what I have lost. I am Queen of the Forsaken, and with this blade, I will reshape this world as I see fit. Andrian held his ground, his voice calm but firm. You fought for them, bled for them. Now you fight only for yourself. This isn't the way, Sylvanas. For a moment, silence hung in the air. Sylvanas could feel the pull of the blade, urging her to strike down these intruders, to feed it more soul. But something in Andrin's words resonated deep within her. She had fought for her people once long ago. She had stood against the darkness, not embraced it. Her grip on the blade tightened, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. But then, with a final surge of willpower, she lifted the blade of vengeance high above her head and brought it crashing down onto the stone altar. The blade shattered with an ear-splitting crack, dark energy exploding outward in a shockwave that knocked everyone to the ground. Sylvanas collapsed to her knees, her strength drained, but the weight that had been pressing on her mind was gone. The blade was destroyed, and with it, Varimather's hold over her. As the dust settled, the chamber was silent. The demons that had followed Varimather's were no more, their dark master vanquished. The resistant soldiers slowly rose to their feet, uncertain of what would happen next. Sylvanas remained on her knees, breathing heavily, her hands trembling. Nathanos approached her cautiously, his eyes filled with concern. Dear my queen, are you all right? She looked up at him, her eyes no longer glowing with dark power, but filled with something else, something closer to the Sylvanas he had once known. It's then over, she whispered, her voice hoarse. The blade is gone. Andren stepped forward, his weapon still raised, but his posture less hostile. You've destroyed the blade, but that doesn't change what you have done. You were still the Banshee Queen, and the Resistance won. Stop until Lord Arryn is free. Sylvanas slowly rose to her feet, her strength returning with every breath. She met Andren's gaze, her expression unreadable. Say why I destroyed the blade because I refused to be a pawn to anyone not Varimather's, and not you. At dawn, mistake my actions for weakness. Lord Arryn belongs to the Forsaken, and it always will. Andren's jaw tightened, but he didn't press the issue. The tension between them was palpable, but there was no fight left in this moment. Both sides had suffered enough for one day. Nathanos stepped beside Sylvanas, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. We should leave, my queen. The Forsaken need you now more than ever. Sylvanas nodded, turning her back on the shattered altar and the broken blade. As she and Nathanos made their way out of the fortress, the resistant soldiers parted, allowing them to pass. Andren watched her go, his eyes filled with a mix of anger and something that might have been respect. Outside, the cold night air hit Sylvanas' face like a shock of reality. She took a deep breath, her mind clearer than it had been in years. The blade of vengeance was gone, and with it, the shadow that had hung over her since the days of the Lich King. But her path was still dark, and the choices she had made would haunt her for the rest of her undead existence. Nathanos walked beside her in silence, but after a few moments, he spoke. How are you? Did the right thing, my queen? Sylvanas didn't respond immediately. She wasn't sure what the right thing was anymore. She had shattered the blade, but the hunger for power, for control still gnawed out at her. She had lost so much, her people, her kingdom, her very soul, but she had one thing left, her freedom. And that for now would be enough. As they disappeared into the night, the fortress behind them crumbled into ruin, the blade of vengeance, buried in its depths, its power extinguished forever. But in the shadows of Lord Arryn, the whispers of vengeance still lingered, waiting for another to heed their call. Sylvanas walked through the twisted trees of the haunted forest, her mind still echoing with the aftermath of the shattered blade. Each step felt heavier than the last, her thoughts clouded with the weight of the choices she had made. The blade of vengeance was gone, but it had left an imprint on her soul. Even now, the hunger for power still whispered in the back of her mind, tempting her with the promise of control, domination, and vengeance. But she forced herself to push those thoughts aside, knowing she could not afford to lose herself again. Nathanos walked at her side, ever the loyal Ranger General. His silence was both a comfort and a reminder of the bond they shared. He had seen her at her best and at her darkest moments, and yet he had never wavered in his loyalty. But even Nathanos could not fully understand the storm raging inside her. As they neared the outskirts of Lord Arryn, the ruins of the once great city loomed on the horizon. The familiar scent of death and decay filled the air, but it was no longer the comforting smell of home. It was a reminder of what she had become. Sylvanas had long embraced her role as the Banshee Queen, ruler of the Forsaken, but now more than ever she questioned whether she was leading them down the right path. "My queen," Nathanos finally broke the silence, his voice low but steady. "What will you do now? Fairies is gone, the blade destroyed. But the resistance still stands. They won. Teased up until they take Lord Arryn from you." Sylvanas' red eyes flickered with anger. "Help them come. They may think they have the strength to take what is mine, but they underestimate me. I don't too need the blade of vengeance to defeat them." Nathanos nodded. Though his expression was grim, he knew better than anyone the challenges that lay ahead. The Lord Arryn resistance was growing bolder, their numbers swelling with each passing day. And though they had failed to take her down today, they would not rest until Sylvanas was overthrown. "I'll send word to our scouts," Nathanos said. "We'll be ready for whatever the resistance plans next." Sylvanas didn't respond immediately. Her mind was elsewhere, wandering through the dark corridors of her past. The destruction of the Blade of Vengeance had given her a measure of freedom, but it had also stripped away something she wasn't ready to lose: her sense of purpose. For so long, her every action had been driven by vengeance, by the need to exact her revenge on those who had wronged her. But now, with Fairies dead and the blade gone, she found herself asking, what next? The thought unsettled her. She was the Banshee Queen, ruler of the Forsaken. She had built an empire out of the ashes of Lord Arryn, forged alliances with demons, and broken free of the Lich King's control. But without a clear enemy to fight, without a source of power to chase, who was she? What was she fighting for? She glanced at Nathanos, his stern face set in determination, and for a moment she envied him. He was so certain of his place in the world, so unwavering in his devotion to her. But Sylvanas had always been more than just a queen. She was a force of nature, a storm that could not be contained. And now that storm felt directionless. "We need to be more than ready, Nathanos. We need to act. The resistance thinks they can challenge me, but they will learn that I am not so easily overthrown. I will crush them before they have the chance to strike again." Nathanos' eyes gleamed with approval. "As you wish, my queen." They walked in silence for a while longer, the twisted trees of the haunted forest giving way to the outskirts of Lord Arryn. The ruins of the city were quiet, save for the distant sounds of undead soldiers patrolling the perimeter. The Forsaken moved with precision and purpose, their loyalty to Sylvanas absolute. But as Sylvanas approached the gates of the city, she felt a strange unease settle over her. The destruction of the Blade of Vengeance had brought her a fleeting sense of relief, but it also left a void, and that void, she realized, was growing. Inside the city, her commanders were already awaiting her return. She swept into the war room, her presence commanding. As always, though, her mind was elsewhere. "Report," she ordered, her voice sharp. One of her commanders stepped forward, his skeletal face betraying no emotion. "The resistance has been quiet since their failed attempt to ambush us, but our scouts have reported increased activity near the southern border. We believe they are regrouping, preparing for another assault." Sylvanas narrowed her eyes. "Then we will not wait for them to come to us. We will strike first." Nathanos glanced at her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. I saw you plan to attack them directly. Sylvanas nodded, her decision made. They think they can outmaneuver me, but they are wrong. We will take the fight to them, and we will crush them before they have a chance to recover. The war room was silent as her commanders exchanged glances. They had always followed Sylvanas without question, but her decision to launch a preemptive strike seemed sudden, even for her. But Sylvanas did not waver. She needed to act to fill the void that the blade of vengeance had left behind. The resistance had been a thorn in her side for too long, and now, without Verimothras to hold her back, she was free to deal with them as she saw fit. Prepare the troops, she ordered. We march at dawn. As her commanders moved to carry out her orders, Nathanos lingered by her side, his expression unreadable. He had always been loyal, but he was also cautious, and Sylvanas could sense his unease. You disapprove, she said, her voice low but firm. Nathanos shook his head. I would never question your judgment, my queen. But I wonder if this is the right time to strike. The resistance is growing stronger. Yes, but we don't know their full strength. A direct assault could be costly. Sylvanas turned to face him, her red eyes blazing. Sword, I am not afraid of cost. Nathanos, I am the Banshee Queen. I will not sit idly by while the resistance gathers strength. I will crush them, and I will remind them why they fear me. Nathanos bowed his head. Sylvanas left the war room, her mind racing with thoughts of the battle to come. But as she walked through the dark corridors of the city, a familiar unease crept over her. It wasn't the resistance that unsettled her. It was the feeling that something deeper was wrong. The blade of vengeance had promised her freedom, but instead it had left her with a growing sense of emptiness. She pushed those thoughts aside as she made her way to the battlements, looking out over the ruins of her kingdom. The Forsaken moved below her, their skeletal forms a reminder of her power, but power, she realized, wasn't tough enough anymore. As the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon, Sylvanas knew that the coming battle would be different. It wasn't just the resistance she was fighting, it was herself. And this time, the outcome was uncertain. The battle came swiftly. Sylvanas led her forces with ruthless precision, her mind focused on the task at hand. The resistance had gathered near the southern border, their forces larger than expected, but still no match for the Forsaken. The clash of steel and the cries of the dying filled the air as the two armies met on the blood-soaked battlefield. Sylvanas fought with a cold fury, her every move calculated and deadly. Her bow sang as she unleashed arrow after arrow, each one finding its mark with lethal accuracy. But even as she cut down her enemies, the emptiness inside her grew. The battle raged on, for hours, the resistance fighting with a desperation born of fear. They had underestimated Sylvanas, and now they were paying the price. But as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the battlefield, Sylvanas realized something was wrong. The resistance was retreating, but not in the way she had expected. They were falling back in an organized manner, regrouping at the edge of the battlefield as if they were waiting for something. And then she saw it. At the far end of the battlefield, a figure emerged from the shadow. Tall and cloaked in darkness, it moved with a predatory grace, its eyes glowing with a familiar, malevolent light. Verimothras. Sylvanas' blood ran cold. She had killed him. She had destroyed the blade of vengeance, severed his hold over her, and yet here he was, alive and more powerful than ever. The demon smiled, his fangs gleaming in the fading light. Yeah, did you really think it would be that easy, Sylvanas? Did you really think you could destroy me? Sylvanas' grip tightened on her bow, her eyes narrowing in fury. Like you were supposed to be dead. Verimothras laughed, a sound that sent a chill down her spine. I am far more than you ever understood. The blade of vengeance was only a tool, a means to an end, but my power is beyond such things. As he spoke, the ground beneath them began to tremble, dark energy radiating from the demon. The resistant soldiers, realizing what was happening, fell back in terror, leaving Sylvanas and her forces alone to face the rising darkness. Nathanos moved to her side, his sword drawn. What do we do? My queen. Sylvanas' mind raced, her thoughts a whirlwind of fear and anger. She had thought she was free, thought she had defeated Verimothras, but now it was clear that she had only delayed the inevitable. We fight, she said, her voice cold and hard. We fight until the end. Verimothras raised his hand and the battlefield erupted in chaos. Dark tendrils of energy lashed out from the ground, tearing through the ranks of the Forsaken with terrifying speed. Sylvanas fired arrow after arrow, but the demon was relentless, his power growing with every passing moment. As the battle raged on, Sylvanas realized that this was no longer just a fight for her kingdom. This was a fight for her soul. Varimathras had always been a master of manipulation, and now he was using her own fear against her. But Sylvanas was not one to be easily defeated. With a final surge of determination, she charged forward, her bow drawn. Varimathras saw her coming, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. But Sylvanas was faster. In one swift motion, she loosed an arrow that struck him directly in the chest, the force of the blow sending him staggering backward. For a moment, the battlefield fell silent. Varimathras looked down at the arrow embedded in his chest, a look of disbelief crossing his face. "See, impossible." Sylvanas stepped forward, her eyes blazing with fury. "You underestimated me, demon. I am not your pawn. I never was." With a final defiant roar, Varimathras collapsed to the ground, his body disintegrating into ash. Sylvanas stood over his remains, her chest heaving with exhaustion. The battle was over, but the war inside her raged on. She had defeated Varimathras, but the cost had been high. The emptiness inside her was still there, gnawing at her, and she knew that no victory, no amount of power, would ever fill it. As the last light of the day faded, Sylvanas turned away from the battlefield, her mind heavy with the weight of what she had lost. She was free, but freedom had come at a terrible price.